actually the full 8 Cascade spells in the deck. He can Cascade into Domri off of a Bloodbraid Elf. He's got a number of just different ways. He can Bloodbraid into Shardless Agent into, say, Punishing Fire or something. Punishing Fire, Grove of the Burn Willows, a great combo in a lot of matchups. This matchup, not one of those. Seth, I don't think, cares at all about repeatable Punishing Fires.
Well, yeah, a lot of these red cards he's running Bloodbraid, which, you know, to go through it, it's 4 Bloodbraids, a Domri, 3 Punishing Fires, and 4 Lightning Bolts, have really carried Matthew Szabo through this tournament because they're so good against the aggro decks. Unfortunately, in this matchup, the loss of the black cards is probably going to hurt him. He does not have Thoughtseize, he does not have Hymn to Turok, cards that Shardless Bug at least can play that gives it game against combo decks.
Yeah.
Matt, instead of deciding to be good against combo, has decided to be great against aggro.
Yeah, and unfortunately that is not the matchup he is facing here in the quarterfinals of the StarCityGames.com Legacy Open.
All right. Yeah. So when we look over at Seth Zulinski, remember Seth is he's our 1 seed. He's been undefeated on the day, playing Classic Reanimator. So for those of you not familiar with the deck, or at least what it's reanimating nowadays, Seth has 7 creatures in the main deck that he reanimates. He has the full 4 of Gristlebrand, which is the preferred reanimation target. So he wants to have as much of those so that he can always have something to reanimate. After that, he has 3 somewhat Silver Bullet style reanimation targets. He has an Iona Shield of Emeria, a Tidespout Tyrant, and an Elesh Norn.
Gristlebrand, when it was printed, sort of jumped in the slot previously occupied by Jin Gitaxias in a lot of decks. And actually, we're underway, so we're just going to go right to the match. Swamp on turn 1 from Seth. And looks like... Oh, we're going to go... Oh, we're going to get some life totals here. life pads set up here. Kind of wonder what was going on there. So yeah, previously occupied by Jin Gitaxias, I believe, was where Gristlebrand kind of jumped in, and both of those cards serving a very similar function. Gristlebrand being the 7/7 lifelinker, kind of getting the nod over Jin Gitaxias.
Yeah, well, what Gristlebrand has done and did for the Reanimator deck when it first came out is it gave it a reanimation target that immediately, when it came into play, would find it more fodder. You know, because you could play this reanimation target, and if it resolved, you could immediately draw 14 cards. You have the counter magic so that it could protect itself against anything and even reload if it was answered.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a situation where if it's Jin Gitaxias, they have a window to answer it before you draw any cards. With Gristlebrand, you have no window, because once it resolves, you can actually respond by drawing a card. So Seth, turn 1, Swamp into Entomb, and that gets a Force of Will, removing Brainstorm from Matthew Szabo.
Yeah, and that's a necessary Force of Will by Matthew. He knows that he can't let the Reanimator deck get one of its turn 2 monster hands. The difficulty with this line, or what Matthew's going to have to do, is that when he's 2-for-1ing himself with cards like Force of Will, he's really just reducing the number of cards in his hand. And as he gives the Reanimator deck more time, he's going to know that it's only a matter of time until Seth is able to get one of those creatures in play. Matthew's going to have to be very aggressive.
And he draws and plays one of the cards that I think is going to be instrumental in this matchup for Matthew, and that is Deathrite Shaman. So Deathrite coming down on turn 1, that's going to be big for Matthew.
Yeah, not just kind of big. This is the way, if Matthew's going to win this difficult matchup, Deathrite Shaman is going to be the way he's going to do it. It's so hard. It's fairly unrealistic for Matthew to expect that he can race Reanimator before it just, if both decks just do their own thing, that Matthew can win first. What he's going to have to do is he's going to have to disrupt the Reanimator deck, and at 1 mana, Deathrite Shaman is the best way for him to do that.
Yeah, and a repeatable source of graveyard interaction that you don't get in a lot of cards. Now, the thing with that is Deathrite Shaman's a pretty popular creature in Legacy, pretty popular card. You're seeing it in a lot of decks. We're seeing it even in the Esper Stoneblade decks, of course, to create the Esper Deathblade deck that is so popular. So I would be shocked if Seth has not prepared or has not played around a Deathrite Shaman a number of times.
Well, a full 4 of our top 8 decks are running Deathrite Shamans.
Yeah, so it's going to be a battle that Seth is either already familiar with, or he's going to have to get familiar with it real quick in this top 8. So an Island and a Careful Study for Seth.
Careful Study, a one-shot Faithless Looting in blue, kind of how I like to think about it. But one of the scarier plays, just once again, one of those enablers. Seth, so many of his cards just put creatures in the graveyard, and we see Gristlebrand discarded.
So I imagine we're going to see Reanimate. There's the turn 2 Gristlebrand potentially on the stack, and it looks like that's going to happen. So Seth going to lose a huge chunk of life. Reanimate one of the more costly reanimation spells. While it only costs 1 mana, it also costs the loss of life equal to the casting cost of the creature that you reanimate. So, Gristlebrand in play.
Yeah, and the amount of redundancy in this Reanimator deck is just staggeringly good. As we saw there, Matthew, for a deck which has very few ways to interact with the Reanimator, he had the turn 1 Force of Will and the turn 1 Deathrite Shaman. Probably his 2 best cards in this matchup, and nonetheless, Seth was able to make a turn 2 Gristlebrand through that.
Yeah, 4 copies of Entomb, 4 copies of Exhume, 4 copies of Reanimate, and an additional copy of Reanimate Dead. And Matthew's going to scoop them up 4.5 minutes into the match. And we're going to the sideboard. Matthew does not even want to try to fight a Gristlebrand.
This is the danger of this matchup for Matthew Szabo, is that once resolved, Matthew has no ways to answer one of these large creatures in his main deck. His removal's all burn-based. And, you know, once someone said escapes his permission, he can't realistically race a Gristlebrand either.
Welcome back to the booth. While these guys are sideboarding, we're going to do our usual shtick, I think, here that we typically do after game 1 of all of our top 8 matches.
Well, if you aren't aware what our usual shtick is, that has to be with the trivia question. We'll ask you a trivia question after game 1 of both top 8, top 4, and the finals. Each of them are for a progressively larger amount of free Star City Premium.
Yeah, so we're going to give away 3 months of SCG Premium to you guys now to one random correct answer. So what we're going to do, ask you the question, you tweet the answer, include the hashtag SCG Premium, which is down there at the bottom. You don't need to tweet it at us. You can just tweet the answer, include that hashtag, and you, if it's correct, you are in the running to win 3 months of SCG Premium. So we've kind of focused a lot on Grand Prix Miami this weekend with our trivia questions. Why stop now?
Yeah, well, Grand Prix Miami's coming up next weekend, so...
yeah, Grand Prix Miami coming up next weekend. That's huge. If you want to know more about that event, MagicGP.com is the place to go. All kinds of cool stuff happening. We've got a 3-man commentator team that is just awesome for SCG Live for those of you who can't make it. But if you can make it, you get the artists. You get the Grand Prix, which is standard. It's going to be huge. SCG has run another Grand Prix this year, not too long ago.
Right. It was Grand Prix Charlotte, and up until this weekend, it was actually the largest Grand Prix that had ever been held. Yeah. And why don't we go ahead and give our listeners the question we have?
Yeah, so that was the largest Magic the Gathering tournament at the time, actually, before this weekend. So how many players, here's for 3 months of SCG Premium, how many players would Grand Prix Miami need to have to beat Grand Prix Charlotte? Not Vegas, not to beat Vegas. We know Vegas has defied expectations
in a lot of ways, but nonetheless, we're trying to still make this, at least I guess on the East Coast, the largest Magic tournament on the East Coast.
Yeah, so how many players would Grand Prix Miami need to have to beat the attendance of Grand Prix Charlotte? Grand Prix Charlotte right back at the end of February, so you want to go ahead and try to find out how many players were there, and you can tweet the answer with the hashtag SCG Premium, and you can be in the running. So,
all right.
In the meantime, we'll go back to the match, and we also have a report from one of the other tables.
So in one of the other tables, we have the match between Matthew Bevenauer and Chris Pikula. This is the Epic Storm piloted by Matthew Bevenauer versus Chris Pikula's Rug Delver deck. Pikula, another one of our undefeated players, able to win game 1. They're now going to the second.
Yeah, so another very fast game, game 1. So these guys had finished game 1 in 4.5 minutes. I think it was about 5 minutes for Pikula. We had the notification just before asking you guys that trivia question. So very fast match, or very fast game happening in that match. So let's look at the boards here. What can Matthew Szabo do to kind of counteract this? Well,
this is I mean, he has some tools that he can use here. I think his first one is he needs to be able to have some way to kill these creatures. And he'll even want to board in the bad ones. Obviously, his best answer here is the 3 surgical extraction that he has. It's a 0-mana answer that can actually interact with Reanimator. Remember here that players have access to each other's sideboard. So there are a couple of routes he can go. If he believes Seth is boarding in Show and Tell, he can board in this one. He can board in this Angel of Despair that he has to try to answer the threat Seth has. He also can board in Maelstrom Pulse as something that actually kills some of the creatures in Seth's deck, even though some of them, for example, Gristlebrand, damage is already done once it hits the table.
Yeah, a couple of cards that I notice actually over there are the Pithing Needle, which can stop Gristlebrand's draw 7. It does nothing otherwise, but you know, that's a 7/7 life-linking flyer is a pretty big deal on its own, so maybe the Pithing Needle doesn't quite do enough. And then the other card that jumps out at me is Notion Thief, because if your opponent's going to try to draw a ton of cards off of Griselbrand, maybe you want the 7 cards.
He can go for that. I think it's a little wrong for the matchup, just as we saw there. Matthew conceded on turn 2. The fact that Notion Thief is a 4-drop,
It's a little.
I mean, I just don't think it gets cast before the game's
Sure.
over. He does have to try it. After all, he does have, you know, cards like Bloodbraid Elf, Shardless Agent, cards that do cost 3 and 4. He can't board all of them out, so he's going to have to be running some number of 4-drops. Maybe this is the one he wants.
So on the other side, Seth Zulinski, you can see his sideboard down there. He mainly wants to stick to his game plan and maybe just increase the quality of some of the spells, but nothing really jumping out at me.
This is a great matchup for Seth Zulinski. His opponent doesn't have too many ways of interacting, so he'll probably stay with most of the cards that he had in game 1. If he's a little worried about graveyard hate, which he should be due to surgical extraction, he probably will board in his 2 show and tells. That way, it'll give him a secondary way to get one of these creatures into play, so that, especially if after he duresses, he can see that Matthew, if he duresses, he can see Matthew has an answer to the graveyard, then he can simply show and tell a creature.
Yeah, and that's the typical backup for a lot of these Reanimator strategies that expect to face graveyard hate in games 2 and 3. You get the show and tells and say, okay, well, not going to let me do it this way, I'm going to do it another way. And of course, show and tell is one of the most popular cards in Legacy, most popularly played cards in Legacy in a wide variety of decks. It has decks named after it even, and but here it is just kind of a role player.
Right. So what's really going to happen is that Matthew's going to have to be pretty picky about his opening hand. He probably will need one of these sideboard cards like the Surgical Extraction in his opener, and he's really going to have to hope that Seth just doesn't have one of those really powerful starts that Reanimator has. You know, if Seth opens a hand with something like Duress, Entomb, Reanimate, all in the opener, it's going to be really hard for Matthew to interact with this. You know, it's unreasonable for Matthew to expect to have more than one hate card, and if Seth is able to take care of that hate card and then still reanimate a target, Seth should be able to get the game.
Yeah, just to note, we did mention the show and tell. He's got 2 in the board. He also has 2 in the main deck, so he can go up to the full 4 there, and that's what we're expecting him to do. Now, you said it earlier. You used the word redundancy, and that is what this deck is built around. It's got so many ways to just get creatures into the graveyard and
get them out. So it has to do the exact
out.
same things. If you look at it, ways to put creatures into play, it has Exhume, it has Reanimate, it has Animate Dead, it has Show and Tell. Ways to get things into the graveyard. It has Entomb, it has Careful Study, it even has Thoughtseize on itself, which while the disruptive card, a lot of the time is used on yourself.
Yeah, I have definitely done that myself playing Reanimator. It's been a while since I played that deck, but the turn 1 Thoughtseize myself is certainly a play that you can make
it's
when you don't have.
Lines that if you're on the other side of the table of it, you know, you first say, wait, Thoughtseizing themselves, and usually your reaction is, oh no, they're Thoughtseizing themselves.
Yeah, something's
that means
wrong.
Something really bad's about to come once that happens.
So it looks like I think Seth kept his 7, and Matthew is possibly going to 6 here. That's what I'm guessing, judging on the fact that Matthew's still shuffling and Seth has a hand.
It does look like Matthew Szabo's on a 6-card hand now, which isn't too surprising. You know, remember, like we said, there are very few cards that matter, and he has to make sure he has one in his opener. For example, he has a lot of cards. Ancestral Vision, almost not even a card in this matchup. If he suspends it on turn 1, he can't. The game will probably end before that spell's ever cast.
Yeah, ideally for Matthew, he wants to cascade into that Ancestral Vision, but you know, sometimes you just have it in your opener, and it's, you know, you're not going to cascade into it that way. You can brainstorm it back, you can cascade into it that way, but I don't know if he's going to have that kind of time. It's really one of those situations where he is going to just have to have some sort of disruption for Seth's plan, and if not, and he's going to need some pressure.
All right, so Szabo has kept a 6-card hand. And we have our game started. So Szabo leads out on Wooded Foothills, and Seth Zulinski makes a Ponder just off Basic Island. I would think this is probably something pretty good for Matthew. A turn 1 Ponder means that at least Seth Zulinski's hand is not perfect. He has to find, well, something.
Yeah. Wants to find some way to sculpt a way to get these big guys into play.
Yeah, his hand's missing at least one piece to the puzzle.
Right.
That's not to say that Seth's deck is ruthlessly efficient in finding that piece that he's missing, so that it's maybe 1, maybe 2 turns until he finds them. But it does give a window for Matthew Szabo to interact.
Looks like the Ponder is showing us Brainstorm, another copy of Ponder, and a Polluted Delta. So more ways to manipulate his library, but not necessarily what he's looking for. But then again, he's going to go ahead and take a card. It looks like he took the Brainstorm. I believe the top card then is Polluted Delta. He's going to cast a Lotus Petal here. And I can see an Iona in his hand.
So it might be with that Lotus Petal. Maybe it's not the case that his hand needs too many cards. We'll see.
Yeah, he also maybe just, I'm going to cast Lotus Petal, and Matthew immediately cracks his fetch land, so afraid of what Seth found with that Ponder. This is a nice little play here from Seth where pondering and then casting Lotus Petal to follow it up just makes it seem from the other side like he found whatever it was he was looking for.
Yeah,
I need to interact.
I'm a little interested on that play as to why he would make that play, because there's no reason to let your opponent know that you have a Lotus Petal in your hand. Usually you do that if you have some instant that you want to play. If there's some reason you might need the mana, though I don't see immediately, unless Seth has drawn an Entomb, I don't see an immediate reason why he needs this Lotus Petal.
And again, it could just be one of those situations where he wants Matthew to counter it, but Matthew just fetched. It looks like the Lotus Petal resolved. Fetch land happened, and this is Matthew's turn. And he's going to use Grove of the Burn Willows for a green mana, and it's going to gives Seth 1 life, but he's going to play a Tarmogoyf that's hopefully going to do something about that life total.
Right, so Tarmogoyf really unimpressive in this matchup because of just how fast the matchup is, but it is one of the faster ways that Matthew has to win the game.
Yeah, he's going to need some sort of clock. He needs pressure and disruption, and he's got a small amount of pressure at this point, and that's the best he can start with. As far as disruption goes, it's not like he has to discard spells, as you mentioned. He's just going to have to counter whatever it is that Seth does that he finds threatening.
All right, so Seth Zulinski, not using a Brainstorm with that fetch on. He fetches on basic Swamp. If I'm Matthew, I'm worried here about a Show and Tell.
And I believe there is a Show and Tell and Iona in the front of Seth's hand, so we're going to find out very quickly if that's the line that Seth is on.
Right, and that gets around any sort of graveyard hit. Remember, Matthew's Szabo with no actual answer to a Show and Tell, unless he's boarded in his 1 Angel of Despair.
I mean, he could just counter the Show and Tell.
Yes, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
He no answer to a Resolve Show and Tell. Right?
Okay,
he can counter the spell. Yeah, I suppose that's an excellent point. He needs the Force of Will or the Angel of Despair. Him putting a creature into play to try to race any Show and Tell creature is dicey at best.
And it looks like Show and Tell's resolved. Matthew's quickly chosen a card, and it looks like Seth actually...
And it is the one of Angel of Despair.
And Elish Norn. Look at that.
Seth shakes his
I'm going to
hand.
shake your hand. That was nice. So you have an Angel, and you have a Tarmogoyf. And so Matthew, ready for the Show and Tell.
And that brings his Tarmogoyf all the way up to a 5/6.
Yeah, we see Angel of Despair. That's a huge card. It's a 5/5 flyer, which, we've seen plenty of those. That's pretty big. But the biggest part of that card is when Angel of Despair comes into play, destroy target permanent, so it just gets whatever it is.
It's a really mean thing to bring to Show and Tell, because it basically means whatever the other person brought doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a mean thing. So Angel and Tarmogoyf combine to knock Seth to 10, and Seth is going to go ahead and Entomb and see what he can get.
All right, so now here's the question. Does Matthew Szabo have another hate card? Does he have a Surgical Extraction? Remember, Seth still can he put Gristlebrand in the graveyard and maybe animate Dead It. Maybe, there's a bunch of ways he can still interact.
Yeah. It's a scary place to be if you're Seth right now, facing down 10 power worth of creatures. It doesn't look like Seth is the Reanimator deck when you see the 10 power worth of guys on the other side of the board spread across just 2 creatures. But, yeah, Seth's going to try to find a way to get into this game. It looks like an Inkwell Leviathan off the top, so I think his hand is just Brainstorm, Iona, Inkwell Leviathan, and so Brainstorm on the stack now from Seth.
Well, there's a couple things he can find. He can either find Reanimate, or maybe he can find a Lotus Petal coupled with an Animate Dead, or coupled with an Exhume. Any of those would be pretty good for him right here, but he's going to need something right now. He's facing down 10 power.
I think he's found Reanimate, but that's a scary card to play right here.
Absolutely.
He's going to pack it in. So despite finding Reanimate, it's just not enough. Even if he's able to reanimate one of those creatures, it's just, yeah, he's in rough shape. So And I couldn't swear to the fact that he found Reanimate. I just think that that's what I saw. So going to Game 3 here, Matthew Szabo with the correct answers to all the threats that Seth presented him there in Game 2 of the quarterfinals of the StarCityGames.com Legacy Open, live from Philadelphia. I'm Joey Pasco in the booth with Matthias Hunt, and you're just joining us. You missed quite a lot of magic this weekend, quite a lot of Legacy action today.
Hopefully our still the best magic is yet to come.
Yeah.
As we're here in the quarterfinals, Seth Zulinski, 7-0-1, the overall 1 seed, in what's supposed to be a great matchup against Matthew Szabo. Going to Game 3 as Matthew, just a few narrow hate cards, was able to steal Game 2 out from under a show and tell.
Yeah, mainly it was one big hate card, I think, that really was what mattered, and it was the right answer to the one threat that Seth had, the one piece of the combo. In fact, it was technically his backup plan of show and tell, and Matthew has the answer in the form of Angel of Despair, and so show and tell resolves, and the only one left with anything to show for it is Matthew and his Angel of Despair with a 5/5 flyer alongside a Tarmogoyf that grew quite a bit from that little interaction. The show and tell, the creature, it ended up being a 5/6 by the time the dust settled. So these guys going to the sideboard again. We've got another report from the other table.
This is Jack Wang versus Rudy Bricks. Remember, Jack Wang is our Maverick pilot. He's the number 2 seed, and finding a matchup against Esper Deathblade, the matchup that really made Maverick burst onto the scene, and Jack has taken the first game, moving into the top 4, and is one step closer to moving into the top 4.
Right, nobody has actually moved into the top 4 just yet, but several players, one game deep. These guys, one game apiece. In this game, Seth is going to be on the play, and I think that's going to be a major factor here, because we know that Seth is capable of some pretty dirty turn 1 plays, turn 1 or turn 2 plays. Now, this particular version does not play Dark Ritual, although I have seen versions that say turn 1 Dark Ritual, Entomb, Exhume.
So the interesting thing about this matchup is when you look at the speeds of these two decks, Seth's deck is so much faster than Matthew Szabo's deck that you actually don't even look at the matchup in terms of who's going first, as what speed is it. The only card that really matters is the fact that when Seth's on the play, and this is as we saw Game 1, Deathrite Shaman sometimes is too slow to be an answer. When Matthew's on the play, Deathrite Shaman usually is a very good card in this matchup. Outside of that, really what starts to matter are these cards that Matthew doesn't even pay mana to cast. Whether it's his Surgical Extractions or that one Angel of Despair, which he's hoping Seth will cast for him.
Right.
These are all 0 mana answers he has, because he knows he has to be just that fast against Reanimator.
One of the ways that Seth can get a jump on things on turn 1 without the Dark Ritual is 4 copies of Lotus Petal that he has in the main deck. So he can still go turn 1 Entomb, then Petal and Reanimate.
Now, when we look at this match in the greater bracket, remember the winner of this match is going to play against either Timur Babakal or Patrick Dixon. They're playing Bug Delver and Shardless Bug. Currently, Patrick Dixon up a game with his the Shardless, looking like Shardless Bug, possibly going to be in the top 4.
And it looks like Seth has actually just finished sideboarding, I think. So he's gonna move on to the shuffle phase here, and as is Matthew, who's already been shuffling for a bit. So yeah, a couple of ways that Seth is able to get a turn 1 reanimation off without any disruption is going to be incorporating that Lotus Petal. So if he can even turn 1 Careful Study, if the Careful Study finds him a Lotus Petal, he may be able to just go, okay, turn 1 Careful Study, discard big guy, play the Petal, and then reanimate.
Yeah, now in an ideal world, Seth may not go for that turn 1 play, just because there's a lot of free answers that Matthew Szabo has, especially post-board, because he does have to worry, if he goes for it right away, he has to worry about 3 Surgical Extractions, 1 Misdirection, or it's not misdirection doesn't work, 3 Surgical Extractions, 4 Force of Wills, and, well, if it's a show and tell, then an Angel of Despair. So there actually are, with there being 7 cards with the Surgicals and the Force of Wills in Matthew's deck that interact with a turn 1 kill, when you're Seth, you may actually try to wait before going on turn 1. You don't want to put all your chips in on that first turn, if at all possible. He can wait for a Thought Seize. He can wait till he has a little more resilient of a hand.
Yeah, and I think the going for it on turn 1 is more a type of thing you might do in game one before the sideboards when you know obviously your opponent bringing in a lot more interaction. So we've got a shout out from Matthew Szabo. Wants to shout out to Alex, his girlfriend, watching the stream. So hey Alex, I'm sure you're cheering Matt on from home, and we're going to see what happens.
As someone who's always been on coverage, especially, I always like it when, you get people at home supporting you, especially sometimes when those people aren't Magic players. It takes a really good committed person to sometimes tune in and be like, well, I don't really know what's going on here, but, just to show support.
Yeah, I just got confirmation. Alex is actually a Legacy expert. She just couldn't make it to
okay.
the event.
Well, fortunately for Matt, that allowed him to make the top 8, that she didn't show up.
Yeah, exactly. She taught Matt everything.
Well, he's the number 8 seed, so if she was there, he would have bumped down to at least 9th and would have missed the top 8.
Exactly. I mean, everything. Yeah, there it is. There's the hello from Matt. So, all right, players have their openers, and Seth Zulinski and his Reanimator deck versus Matthew Szabo and his Punishing Rug deck.
Yeah.
Here in Game 3 of the quarterfinals, one of these players is going to the top 4 right after this game.
Remember, Matthew's keep is really centered just around almost completely around 7 cards. I suppose 11 cards if you count the Deathrite Shamans. What's in the rest of his deck really doesn't matter in this matchup. When you look at cards, Lightning Bolt, Ancestral Vision, Bloodbraid Elf, Shardless Agent, none of these actually do anything.
So while these guys are evaluating their openers, we have a report from one of the other tables. Chris Pikula has won 2-0 versus Matthew Bevenauer, and that means Rug Delver is on to the semifinals.
Yeah, Chris Pikula, remember, 6 wins, then 2 draws on the day. Very adept with the Rug Delver deck. Not too much of a surprise to see that he's able to use that fast clock and blue mana to dismantle the combo deck in the top 8.
Now those guys are on the other side of the bracket from these players, so neither of these guys will have to face Chris Pikula until the finals.
Yeah, they'll be facing the winner of Timur Babakal and Patrick Dixon, the 2 bug players who now are going to Game 3.
Yeah, just got that information as well. So still, I think at the point where we're evaluating our openers, Seth has decided to keep after a little bit of time tanking on it, and I think Matthew is kind of struggling with his
well, yeah,
he's
been pretty heavy being in the top 8. Matthew's got to know that this matchup, of all the matchups in the top 8, I would say this is probably the last one that he wanted to see. It maybe not the last one. The Tess would have been a pretty bad matchup.
Yeah.
He's trying to dodge the combo decks today, and
right.
Unfortunately he hit one of them in the first round. Though to be fair, if he makes it through this one, I would say Matthew's a pretty good favorite against either of the players in the top 4.
And he's going to go ahead and go to 6 cards. Feels like maybe the 6 is going to be better than whatever those 7 were. I would love to know what those 7 were, just out of curiosity, but we didn't get a good look.
It will remain a mystery.
It will. But Seth, now the thing here, Seth kind of tanked on his hand, so that makes me think that maybe he kept something that's shaky. Yeah, it's not a snap keep like, okay, I've got everything I need and something to clear the way, like the Thoughtseize or something.
And what's so interesting in this matchup from Matthew Szabo's perspective is there's so many hands that he can draw here, which would be so great, and he just has to immediately ship. Say for example on the draw he saw a hand of maybe 2 dual lands, two dual lands, a Grove of the Burn Willows, a Punishing Fire, an Ancestral Visions, a Lightning Bolt, and a Bloodbraid Elf. You'd be like, wow, what a great idea. You have Punishing Grove, you have Visions, you have Bolt, you have Bloodbraid, and you'd be like, no, that's an immediate ship in this match.
Yeah.
It's like, no way, that can't win at all.
Yeah, not going to be able to interact, not going to be able to win the match. So it's strange, and I think that's what a lot of combo decks force you to do. You're in a situation where you actually need to interact, and that's why combo decks are so popular, because it's kind of like, sometimes even if you have ways to interact with me in your 60, you may not have ways to interact with me in your first 7 cards.
Right, so a lot of ways, it forces the opponent's deck to mulligan more often than it normally would.
You've seen decks that are super high variance, like Goblin Charbelcher, which, I think, in a lot of ways, those decks will literally sideboard 0 cards or 15 islands, as we've seen before, because the deck is so straightforward. It is just built to be what it is.
It does one thing, and it does it well, and there's nothing else it does, so why would you need a sideboard?
Yeah, exactly. And if your opponent has the answers, then, hey, all right, you win.
Well, it looks like Matthew has some interaction in this hand. He does have a Force of Will in here.
I see that.
Remember, because of Force of Will, though, unlike Angel of Despair, it doesn't just trump. He needs to make sure he has a follow-up clock when he has a card like Force of Will.
So we're underway. Seth Zulinski leads on an Underground Sea, and Matthew has a Wasteland on turn 1. Seth is going to respond to that Wasteland with a Brainstorm.
Yeah, a little interesting there. You know, I'm not positive if he needs more lands. This is a pretty good Brainstorm, and that's what it tells to me, at least, is that maybe his hand's a little land light. Otherwise, it might just be that Seth could just easily let him Wasteland the land. If you Brainstorm without a fetch land, you know, Brainstorm actually loses all of its value.
Yeah, I believe I see a Polluted Delta in his hand. I'm not entirely sure. Report from the other table really quick. Jack Wang has won 2-0 over Rudy Brixa.
Yeah, Rudy Brixa, one of the undefeated players, losing to Jack Wang. So Jack Wang 8-1 on the day with his Maverick deck. He will be playing against Chris Pikula. He'll be one of the last players with a chance to dispatch the Meddling Mage.
So Polluted Delta from Seth, as I thought it might be, and finds a swamp right on top. I think he's still going to need to shuffle here. Or unless there's... Okay, yeah. It's nice that you knew it was on top, but you still need to shuffle after the fetch land. And of course, he did, you know, offer Matthew the chance to the opportunity to shuffle, but I think Seth needs to shuffle first. So there you go. Shuffles, presents it to Matthew. Matthew's going to shuffle here. So Seth fetches up a basic swamp. Now that is Wasteland proof. So on turn 2, Seth is going to cast a Thoughtseize. And we're going to see exactly what Matthew kept, unless he wants to go ahead and just answer this with a counterspell. And he very well might. No, he's going to show us. Okay, Force of Will, Bloodbraid Elf, Tarmogoyf. What is that red
That's
card?
Pyrostatic Pillar.
Okay.
Typically a card that's used against Storm decks. Matthew's boarded it in here. A little bit of a curious sideboard, just because Seth won't play too many cheap spells. What this does is it deals 2 damage to a player whenever they play a spell that costs 3 or less, which, to be fair, in Legacy is most spells.
Right.
So what I think Matthew's doing here is he's using this. This is a card that just deals some damage. He's using it kind of like just as a burn spell. Maybe he's trying to increase his clock and figures that this is better than something. If Lightning Bolt is only 3 damage to the dome, it's probable that Pyrostatic Pillar is more damage to the dome than Lightning Bolt.
Sure.
He has so many dead cards that you see him boarding in cards that, you know, on first glance look bad, but you say, well, he probably would be the first to admit, yeah, they are bad, but they're probably not as bad as these other cards that I have to play.
Yeah, so the Pyrostatic Pillar is actually what Seth decided to take with the Thoughtseize, and Matthew immediately draws another one, like right off the top. And so Seth plays Scalding Tarn for his turn. Matthew now is able to cast that Pyrostatic Pillar. So it's just been land go since then.
And Matthew also with a Surgical Extraction in his hand, we saw.
Ah, I didn't quite catch that.
Right.
So that was just off the top this turn, I believe.
Yeah, so he has that. He has a Surgical, a Force of Will. Matthew has a setup that could win this game. He has 2 hate cards in Force of Will and Surgical. He has a way to win the game in Pyrostatic Pillar. Well, not a way to win the game, but a way to get closer to it. You know, obviously you can't win the game with Pyrostatic Pillar because your opponent will just not cast the spell that kills them.
Right, but it definitely chokes them on what they're able to do if their life total is low. So, yeah, Seth is going to take a look at that pillar, and he's going to cast Show and Tell.
All right,
Take
so
2.
He's going to hope, you know, that Matthew has not drawn the Angel of Despair again. Remember, Matthew's deck with very few ways to interact with Show and Tell. Does Matthew, we know, has the Force of Will. Does he have the card to pitch to it?
So, yeah, it looks like it may have been declared as a resolved spell because Seth has already chosen his card, but I could be wrong. Maybe Seth is just getting ahead of himself.
Yeah, Bloodbraid Elf, Surgical Extraction, Tarmogoyf, Force of Will. He has the Force of Will, but Matthew Szabo does not have the blue card to pitch to it. And Tarmogoyf can be a little outclassed by Gristlebrand at the Show and Tell.
So Gristlebrand is in play, and you know Matthew had to scoop to that game 1 almost immediately. We'll see if he's going to put up more of a fight here in game 3, where really he has.
And there's the second blue card, a turn too late for Matthew Szabo. As you said before, he may be have been playing Pithing Needle and could have drawn to it and somehow hopes to race Gristlebrand, but even that's a tall order. And as soon as Gristlebrand gets that hit in, this game's going to be very impossible for Matt to win.
Yeah, and now even the pillar is laughable because Gristlebrand's just going to gain 7 as soon as it swings or blocks. So off the top for Seth is a Lotus Petal, and Matthew Szabo with a Pyrostatic Pillar and a 4/5 Tarmogoyf in play is really up against the wall here against Seth Zulinski and his Griselbrand. Here in Game 3 of the quarterfinals of the StarCityGames.com Legacy Open live from Philadelphia.
Right,
Seth looks like he's doing some math here.
Yeah, I mean, well, he's able to untap with a Griselbrand. So really what he has to do is just think about worst case scenarios here. You know, does he go to 21 and pass the turn? Does he go to 21 and then draw 7 going back to 14?
Right.
You know, all of these are great decisions and he'll probably win no matter which one of them he chooses. But he wants to just kind of imagine, you know, if every single thing went wrong, you know, what would I want to do?
He's going to get greedy and he's going to say, you know what? I think I'm going to show and tell again. You didn't have much last turn, so you had one draw step.
Yeah, this is a really dangerous play. If Matthew Szabo actually has, well, it's not too dangerous. Matthew Szabo had drawn the Angel of Despair, Seth would actually lose his Griselbrand here.
Right. What he would end up with is probably the Elish Norn that's in his hand instead.
Right, he will get a chance with that trigger on the stack to draw 7 off the Griselbrand, so he probably would still be okay.
Right.
But, you know, once you have a Griselbrand in play, there's not a huge reason to add another creature to the board.
So Force of Will for the show and tell, currently on the stack, Force removing Force, and Seth is trying to decide whether or not he wants to try to draw into some counter magic for that Force of Will and possibly get that Elish Norn into play through the Force of Will. So now Seth knows what are the remaining cards in Matthew's hand.
Yeah, we have to remember that Seth went down to 12 to cast the show and tell. If I'm Seth Zulinski, I let this get countered, and I actually don't even know if I draw cards. I just hit with a 7/7 lifelink. He knows the Punishing Rug deck, and it just seems very unlikely that Seth would be able to interact. That Seth would be able to race just a 7/7 flying lifelink.
Yeah, so here he's going to go ahead and draw 7 off of the Griselbrand. He's going to 5.
Yeah, he really doesn't seem to want this show and tell to get countered. So he's going to go down to 5. There's a little bit of a window for Matthew Szabo, but he still is probably fine. The lifelink Griselbrand is really hard to deal with.
Yeah, Seth very likely to attack following this little exchange of spells. I think that show and tell is going to be successfully countered by the Force of Will, because I don't see a way that Seth can counter it himself. I didn't see Force of Will among those cards, and he's tapped out. So show and tell is successfully countered by Matthew Szabo, and Griselbrand now, I imagine, is going to go ahead and attack. But I mean, he could just hold back. Yeah.
I mean, gaining 7 and taking 4 is still a net life gain. So if you're Seth Zulinski, it just makes sense to make this play.
So Griselbrand comes over for 7. Going to knock Matthew to 12. Going to put Seth up to 12. And
right, and that's one of the things that's, yeah, you know, life totals can always be misleading on seeing who's winning the game. You know, first you might first glance be like, oh, Seth's in a little bit of trouble, but not in too much trouble at all.
No, not at all. You got to look at the cards on the board, and you know, the actual situation in the game. Life totals definitely can be misleading, because they're often used as a resource in this game, and a deck that certainly showcases that quite a bit is Reanimator, with cards like Reanimate.
Yeah, Reanimate Griselbrand, sure, I'll go to 12. That's fine.
Who cares? So, I believe this is the end of Seth's turn. He's going to have to move the discard, and he's got quite a grip there. Maybe doesn't want to discard anything that is too vulnerable to surgical extraction.
Yeah, and really, I'm not sure, again, whether it matters really what he discards. I'm very skeptical that Matthew Szabo can actually answer Griselbrand on the board just as a flying 7/7.
Yeah, Seth, I think, is playing, you know, just conservative, trying to make sure that he's got a backup plan or some way to interact in case Matthew's able to deal with that Griselbrand. You know, he doesn't want to be too sure of himself. Doesn't want to, you know, just go ahead, oh, I have Griselbrand in play, shrug, do whatever you want, I'm just going to attack you. You know, he needs to really think about what he wants to keep. He's actually still in his second main here. He played his land for the turn, and he's gonna Thoughtseize here.
Right. So Seth down to 10. He really, I think he really just wants to make sure
he's down to 10, down to 7, because of that pyrostatic pillar.
Down to 8.
I'm sorry,
it's converted mana cost 3, 2 damage.
Right. Sorry about that. So yeah, down to 10 because of the pillar, and then he's gonna lose 2 if the Thoughtseize resolves.
Which it's going to. So yeah, he's down to 8. Really spending more life points than he probably needs to, but as we see, Bloodbird Elf, Surgical Extraction, not much Seth has to care about.
Yeah, I mean, Seth can take the extraction here just because he's got to take a card. So,
exactly.
I mean, unless he really doesn't want Bloodbraid Elf to hit the table 2 turns from now.
Well, I mean, the only Bloodbraid Elf hits the table is if Matthew Szabo's next 2 draws are lands, and if Matthew Szabo's next 2 draws are lands, his life total is about 0.
Yeah.
So that's going to be just
That's what I'm
fine leaving
saying.
him Bloodbraid Elf.
So that's what I'm saying. Like he's going to take the extraction, and that's what he did. So Seth at 8 now. And he discards, and there you see Elish Norn, one of the cards he discarded. He's got Reanimate. I believe he also has Exhume in hand. Tarmogoyf growing a little bit.
And this is so risky, this line that Seth has taken. If Matthew Szabo top decked a Lightning Bolt here, he would have stolen this game.
Yeah.
So he knocks Seth Zulinski all the way down to 3. And Seth's going to... Matthew did not draw the Lightning Bolt, he drew a different red card. And he drew Pyrostatic Pillar.
That is the 3rd copy of Pyrostatic Pillar, so those are all the pillars that Matthew has. Seth, at this point, shouldn't really care because that Gristlebrand's just going to put his life total out of reach. Matthew left with 1 card in hand. We all know that it is Bloodbraid Elf, Seth included. And I think that was just an untap swing go from Seth. Matthew down to 5, Seth up to 10.
I like the untapped swing go. I almost feel like it's what he should have been doing from the get-go.
Yeah, as soon as Gristlebrand hit play.
Well, there's just the only way that Seth's life total would get low enough to lose the game is if he does the damage to himself. Remember, Szabo, that swing with the Tarmogoyf was almost the first, I think is the first damage that Szabo actually has dealt this game. I think all the rest of it was damage that Seth did to himself or took from Pyrostatic Pillar.
Which he kind of did to himself, too.
Right.
So there you see the Tarmogoyf is going to knock Seth down to 5, so both players with the same life total, but yeah, the Gristlebrand is unanswered as it was in Game 1, and Matthew Szabo falls 2 games to 0 to Seth Zulinski in his Reanimator deck. Classic Reanimator.
I think a pretty valiant effort in a matchup, which was just really difficult for Matthew Szabo.